through and you're like, ah.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
this week I was like, I'm like, oh, here's the reading, and I did it and it was fine. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And this week's assignment's quite light touch. It's just as if you've seen so we try to do that. Like the week one, we know that it's a lot. Today's session, we don't have a guest. We've got a lot of time together, and we'll have time in our teams at the end to discuss how we're going to work. So we're trying to like pass on a lot of stuff, a lot of foundational things without overwhelming you, but with, also challenging you. But we do also really want feedback. So at the end of the session, we might do a really, really quick retro as well, if possible. And Horatio, do you have enough people in your team with wk2Mon?
I mean, we are 3 people, Thomas, Eileen, and me.
I think that's fine.
I don't remember. Jim and Matt are gone. I mean, they will not be coming. I mean, I don't know if they already talked to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and what about Brianna? Any word from Brianna?
No.
Okay. No, I was just checking, and I haven't heard anything. Have you, Sean?
No, but if you can reach out to her.
I might send her a message, yeah. Because it's not like her.
Okay.
So Horatio, did Jim indicate to you that he won't be participating in the course?
What I understood was that he had already talked to you. He seemed to not expect to really be following the course. I mean, I'm not sure what he was thinking.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay, I'll follow up with that, Susan.
Okay, great.
But let's get going. So thanks, everyone. So the check-in question today, we'll do it all together in a kind of a short answer, is what drives you in your work? Oh, I'm going to put it in the chat. So checking in with what drives you? Why are you here working? Does anyone want to volunteer? Thomas?
I think there's 2 things, and they're very different. So the first is a sense of purpose and like alignment with the message of consensus, and specifically what the Academy team is trying to do. And the second thing, which is probably a bit opposed to this, but like just doing something is really important. Even if it's like doing the work is sometimes the point of like doing work. It's almost like a meta circle. Yeah. Thanks.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing. Thanks, Thomas. Who's next? What drives you? Frank.
So I work in support for our customer success circle. One thing that drives me is I like to help people. I think I've known that for a lot of years now. So I do definitely get a joy of seeing other people happy when I help them out.
Nice, thank you. Horatio.
What drives me is exploring what I find interesting.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Who's next? Sean, and then Madeline.
I can go next. I love learning, but when you've learned all this information, it's stuck in your head. So what are you going to do with it? So the next logical step is to share it. So that's why I was doing this before Academy, and Academy was a great match because you learn, then you share.
Great, thank you. Madeline.
I'm a bit like Thomas. I don't really know how to word it, but yeah, I like to get stuff done. So if I've got a job where there's interesting stuff to get done and smart, interesting people to work with, then I am pretty happy and pretty driven to get the stuff done.
Okay, cool. Seeing results.
Yeah.
Feeling like action is happening.
Yeah.
Okay, who would like to? Karima, and then Eileen.
Yeah, I think what drives me is like imagining that whatever I do is impactful on like a really larger level. That or as long as that I have great intentions on what I do, that like what I do will be impactful. And then like if I have a job that allows me to do that, then that's really awesome. So like, I think that's what like drives me ultimately, probably. That
Yeah,
makes sense.
good to get clear on that. Thank you, Eileen.
For me, it's building relationships through helping others, and just, I guess, allowing my team to be a lot more focused, by me off, I guess, doing the things that they don't necessarily need to do.
Great. Yeah, building relationships, that's pretty important, I think, for a lot of people. Jenny?
Yeah, I think for me, it's about seeing growth over time. So there's like a little bit of a feedback loop there. So if you don't start, it can be hard, but once you get started, you can see how far you've come.
The idea of, progress. Thank you.
I think I'm last. Yeah, I think all of the above. But what else is unique to me is just the values of the company. If anyone sitting on this side of the world will know all the things that the Commonwealth Bank has done where I used to work. So I think it's just, putting everyone else above yourself is important for me.
Cool. Thank you. Susan?
Yeah, I'm going to go meta and esoteric as well. I think for me, over time, what drives me in my work is sort of this knowledge that work challenges everything about me and how I've developed and changed and iterated as a human, or noticed things about me to challenge and change and iterate through work. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Thanks. I think it's two things, like those beautiful moments of synchronicity when you're like in a group of people and you're like jamming on an idea and like you get somewhere and it's just like, just gives you such a like amazing feeling of being around people that you know really well and that know you and you can create. And then it's just I think it's starting new things, as you well know, Susan, putting new things into the world and seeing if they take flight. Okay, thanks everyone. I'll just give you a brief overview of what we're going to do today. So we're gonna, as I mentioned in the email and in the Slack, we'll just retouch briefly on last week, two things from last week, which weren't they weren't your group assignments, which was agreements and the colleague letter of understanding. What will happen is Susan and I will host a room each. Susan will be hosting a room around roles and just holding some reflection and sharing on the component of roles and self-organizing teams. And I'll be holding the room on rhythm and cadence. So we'll split you into two and you'll have 15 minutes in each room just to really start digging into your things individually. So we'll manage that process. And then from there, we will jump into content and we will go talk. Susan and I will talk to some of the content that we included in the reader today. From there, we'll do a participatory exercise based on that content, which I won't tell you about now. And then we'll go into another exercise to go even deeper on a different part of the content. We're going to hear very quickly from a couple of people on conflict resolution. And then we'll go into teams for 15 minutes before we check out together. So this week is a lot about hearing from you and sharing and reflecting together, just with that block of content. That who managed to have a look at the reader and do some of the readings? Okay, cool, great, thanks everyone. And the content overview section will, if you haven't managed to do that, give you a little bit to start, but we'll try to dig into the relational trust layer and listening communication quite deeply. So it will be good. Yeah. Okay, so let's do the rooms to begin with, unless there's any questions or noticings from anyone. Okay, great. So Susan,
Tuesday.
It is Tuesday, I think. Yes, it's Tuesday here. Yes.
Is it a public holiday in the US today?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's Martin Luther King Day.
Oh, and thank you for being here. Really appreciate it.
Oh, of course.
So roles instead of job titles. Discuss.
So with roles instead of job titles, is the idea that you have one role or you split all the roles out and people will all be holding multiple roles?
Yeah, I like to, a friend of mine has a company called Optimal Workshop, and they think I don't know, Sean, do you know Andrew Mayfield? So they've got a concept, the way they look at it is hats. So, for example, Andrew is the CEO, and sometimes he wears the hat of the CEO. When he goes out externally into the world, he wears a CEO hat. Internally, in his day-to-day work, he might wear the hat of project lead on customer success. And he might also hold the hat of principal investment advisor. And he might also hold the hat of Thursday smoothie worker. So he has all of these different roles that are necessary in the organization, but they might not fall in line with what is traditionally recognized as the role or the job description of a CEO. So where I see this concept work best is in teams or in circles. Hold on, Brianna's just joined, so I'm just gonna pop her into Kate's room. Hold on, there we go. And so what Paul was talking about it to us about us with last week, that in his company in Procolab, there's, I don't know, 20 different roles that need to be done. And in order for those jobs to get done without a quote unquote hierarchy of, I guess, concerns, anybody in the organization can choose to do any of these jobs. So in their example, for example, the banker is not the CFO, or the person who would traditionally be a CFO. One thing Paul didn't talk about, which I find really great, is they also have this concept of role zero, which are the I guess the tasks and the responsibilities of everybody in the circle. So role zero for this group might be something like commit to doing the readings, commit to being here every week, give your best, and hold each other to account or something like that. So I'm just really curious, like, what more have any of you thought about this, both during the assignments and the homework and just generally?
I'll go first because so we work with the Singapore office quite frequently. There's definitely cultural nuances that we have to keep in mind as well. I spent a bit of time in Singapore growing up till I was about 16. When you're given a title in Singapore, it sticks. Like it's sort of like a boundary they're comfortable with because that's the way we were educated and sort of drilled into our heads. So it's going to be interesting to see how we're trying to build a social contract now with our colleagues in Singapore, and it's becoming quite apparent that the role and the construct that they had agreed to is very important to them.
And why is that, do you think?
I don't know. I haven't looked into it too much yet, but I think it's culture. I just think I was hired for a role. It's important to me. They must have thought about this. I respect the hierarchy. I respect my bosses. They tell me what to do. I mean, I'm generalizing here, by the way. So please, don't take this the wrong way. But it's just what I've observed so far.
Great. Somebody else have thoughts?
I can
go on, Sean.
Yeah, so maybe I sometimes get confusing or conflicted between like a large organization and a small agile organization, because the smaller it is, the more things you have to do, whereas in a big IBM, you do one thing really well and that's all you do. So sometimes it can be conflicting because you want to be really good at one thing, Because if you do everything, then you're a generalist sort of thing. So it's conflicting within me.
Do you think there's room to do both? Or at least being conscious about, right? I am like the best coder in the world, and that's really where I get all of my joy and energy, and the way I can best serve the team is just through coding. Do you think that's okay?
I think it depends on the circumstances. Yeah.
Tom, you had your mic off.
I think there's like two things that really struck me. I feel that discussion of roles feels more, there's been a lot of talk about authenticity and honest, or like radical candor, and like discussing roles, it seems like a form of that radical candor. It's like what you're actually going to do. Paul, I think, brought it up as like in an interview, they say, hey, this is, we're hiring for you, but these are all the things that you're going to have to do. That seems very honest to me. I really like that. I think, not to jump ahead into the readings that we had to do this week, but like, I think there's certain stages of adulthood that, like, if you are not 3 and above, that's just not, those people can't have, those people there will be tension there. Let's put it that way. There's going to be tension with like a 2 and below, with an organization that expects for roles and not job titles, because how the reading was laid out. And I think the final point, the thing that when Sean sort of brought up IBM, I think the reality is, to an extent, it seems like in large organizations, even in large organizations where, like, in my experience, there's always like someone who, like, they have this job, but for some reason they're the person with the spreadsheet for blank thing. And they're like the one person in this massive organization for somehow like has all the passwords, or like this role that they took on probably when they were hired. And now, it's 20 years later, they're still doing it. And like, they have this role and it's never acknowledged. And it'll be, like a 25,000 person company and they're still doing it. So surfacing that is awesome, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. The other thing that comes up for me, because I spent most of my career in big multinationals like that, and it's like you're hired for your role. That's what you're meant to be really, really good at. And then the only way to break out of that is like to go on the management track, so that you're actually managing people who do that role. And like, I think that I could have a whole diatribe about why I think that's fundamentally flawed and super pejorative, and putting heaps of pressure on the individual, if that's their only way to quote unquote advance, is to then be given the power and authority and coercive control over other people's livelihoods. So that's my kind of really radical view of what I think big organizations and multinationals enforce when the only advancement track is management. Madeline, and then Karima.
I feel like a discussion of roles rather than job titles would be really relevant, like in the startup environment, because we have a bunch of jobs that we are trying to hire for that we haven't yet filled. So the reality is the rest of us are doing those things. It's not that we are not doing them, but it's not necessarily talked about or acknowledged, so there's people who just step up and do those things we haven't filled. But the reality is, if we talked about roles, we'd be saying, well, this person over here is actually doing 3 roles and this person's doing 1. So, maybe we should be adjusting their output when you consider this person actually has these additional roles, even though you've actually got the same job title. Like there's 2 of us with the same job title, but one is doing 4 roles and one is actually doing 1. So if we threw out the job titles and just talked about roles, it would be a lot more obvious what was actually happening and which things were probably more critical to fill.
No, for sure. What are you thinking, Karima?
I guess a few things, and one thing is bringing up like the readings from. It's hard not to think about the readings from this week, and like with roles and the way that I see like the adult, the stages of being an adult, and then also like the way roles line up is that this is a different perspective, but I think that like some roles you can do depending on like your level of adulthood. Like I see myself like being able to do one role really well because I'm at this level and this aspect. But when it comes to like a role, like for me, a challenge for me is fundraising. So this year, like that's something I want to do. When it comes to doing that, I feel like childlike. I'm like nervous. So I realized that like initially on my team, that should not be what my role is. Coming out like that is not my strength. And then like looking at it like that, because when I looked at the spectrum, I felt like it varied for me. And I was just like, I don't know where I am on this. But the different things it matches up with. So that was like really what I was thinking about.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I don't know if this will make you feel better or worse, but that never really changes. Like even when you get to be my age, right? Sometimes I still feel completely childish if I'm given a challenge that I just feel like I have no competence around or no context around. So I think that you're right that it is dynamic and it flows all the time, right? So I just want to shift for the last couple of minutes to see if anybody has any reflections on the idea or not. That if we're able to actually express, I'm Madeline. These are the hats or the roles that I fulfill in this team. This therefore is what I'm accountable for, and these are the metrics or measures by which we will all know whether or not I'm doing a good job at holding this role. That's like the next step. How do people feel about that? And what would it, just curious to think what it would feel for you if you were actually setting your own OKRs or measures of success in accordance with your individual roles.
Feels disruptively empowering. So the reason combining those two words is because like it's empowering because it's great to say like, oh, these are the things I should be accountable for because I'm doing them, and disruptive because truly it's going to make people question like, wait a second, these are the things you're actually doing. Like, what are our real priorities? And so disruptive could be actually bad or it could be good in that situation.
Well, I'd just love to hear you say a little bit more about priorities. I'm in the middle of another conversation in another group, which is what's the difference between what are we optimizing for as a team and what are our priorities? Yeah, sorry, I don't want to get us off track, but I was just curious about why do you think that if you, Tom, were setting your own accountabilities, that would call into question priorities in a different way?
I think it makes us examine our priorities because if someone is taking on a role, say, of they're mediating or doing business development or they're interfacing between teams, right? Like those are things that someone might be doing. That might be taking up a lot of their time, but the stated goals of the team might be something different, and you might not realize how important of a contribution those are to reaching a goal. And it might cause for a re-examining of where effort or time is spent. Really, really time and effort, right? Those are the things that we, in some ways, have. I guess funds as well, right? So you examine those things and it could be quite illuminating.
And disruptive, like you said. Anybody else have a thought about that, accountability in relation to roles?
I think sometimes, Thomas was saying earlier about, you start with a small organization and you've got those people who are still doing those roles. Sometimes that's a power thing too. Like I've been in large organizations where people quite clearly are doing roles that it makes no sense for them to be doing. They've got a heap of other skills in other parts of the business they should be applying. There's no need for them to be doing it. But there's a thing where they don't want to give it up, whether it's their identity or whether it's a control thing. But it can often actually be quite difficult to wrest those roles away from people.
Yeah, totally. And I wonder how much of that is parenting as well. Like, oh no, like how how many times have I have when I was a manager or when I've had managers that said, "Oh no, I'm just protecting you, just so that you don't have to think about this strategy stuff, so that you can just do." So funny. All right, that's time up. I'm just going to swap out me for Kate. So I'm just going to move Kate to here, and I am going to.
Okay, so,
Sorry, I realize there's probably no elegant way to do that. I hope Kate didn't just like disappear in the middle of like this amazing.
Kind of.
Probably what happened. Hi, Brianna. Glad you could be here.
Hi, sorry I was late.
That's okay. Did Kate ask you to check in, or are you okay?
I'm all good.
Great. So I'm going to spend 15 minutes just doing a similar thing to what you just did around rhythms and cadences. I'm just going to set the timer around roles. So just really curious to hear your reflections on this whole concept of roles versus job titles. Any reflections on what Paul shared about how they do it in Procolab, how you might be thinking about doing it in your teams in Consensus. Yeah, and we can just go around and do a round if that feels good for people. So whoever would like to start.
I can start. So the way I started back in August, the way we started is we were given a job title pretty much when we were hired. So I was given support engineer. And with that, some sort of responsibilities were predefined with that, with that title. So working on support tickets, tickets that or requests that customers send to us or to spokes and circles, and just answering those, but also helping the spokes and circles building the foundational layers of a support process for their own functions. And so this week and last week we were doing a OKR process for Q1. And within the OKRs, I was hoping to add defining our roles and responsibilities within our team, because I felt like we didn't have that. When we started, we were already given our title, but there was no written form of what our responsibilities and roles are. And pretty much the feedback that I got from my team lead is that we're currently not ready for that, to define our roles and responsibilities. So it sort of begs the question of when will we be ready?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Did you press him or her at all saying with that question, or what do you think we need to be ready to do that? It could be interesting.
I did ask them. What they pretty much said was it wasn't up to us. It's all defined by the needs of our circle. And they said that everything could change within a few short months. And so my feedback to them, or my response, was that everything could change, but we could also change our what we wrote for our roles and responsibilities. I understand that everything could change within a few months, but that doesn't mean we need to have a permanent solution to that. That can change as well.
Great, thanks. Hopefully you got them thinking. Jenny.
Yeah, so I shared my CLOU with a teammate who had done a similar exercise. And one of the things that I took from the exercise was that we defined our own roles. We kind of said retroactively, this is what I think I do on the team. And some of them are a little bit aspirational, and I think that was okay. But the thing that I liked about Paul and the Percolab exercise was that the team came up with the things that the team does and needs to do. So because some of the things that my teammate did, for example, or even some of the things on mine, maybe were non-essential team functions, but we were like, well, I do these. I didn't know how to give feedback to my teammate that I didn't think those were essential, but that's like another thing. I mean, I do have questions about how to do that, but
do you have an example of one that you'd be willing to share that you think is a non-essential team function?
I'm trying to think of a specific. I guess it was like really general. One of the things on there, or one of the sections, I remember it being, I could like look and be more specific, but I remember it being incredibly general and just like, my role is to make sure that the team is functioning smoothly. And that kind of thing to me didn't seem like something that one person could do. I don't know. It was.
Yeah, this is a good point. This is one of my favorite things about the Percolab process that Paul didn't talk about, and that's the concept of role zero, which is exactly what you're describing. So this is something that everybody on the team needs to do, and it can't just be held by one person.
Can you say that again? I think.
Yeah, in Percolab they call that role zero. So in any team you have maybe 2 or 3 or 4 roles, but everybody has role zero. And what you just described would be an element of role zero.
Okay, yeah. And that was feedback that my teammate had given me as well. I think one of the things I said was like showing up and, addressing needs as I see them come. And he was like, shouldn't everyone do that? And I was like, yeah, that's a good point. So, okay, cool. I'm glad to know that that's part of it.
And how did doing the clue, how was the clue process different from, you mentioned that you already do this within MetaMask, that you define your own roles?
Yeah, I think so. We all have like title-ish things, like most of us are software engineers, and then there's some operations and product people, I would say, and then there's a support arm. So we all fit in a bucket, I would say, and then it was more about just making what we do day to day more specific.
Cool. Thanks. Who wants to go next? Hannah. Sorry.
I can go next. No, brief one. Look, from last week, our team has started introducing, there's quite a few of us from our team that are actually doing this SO101 course, so it's actually been perfect timing as we kind of discover our ways of working. At the moment, we all kind of have very strict specialty areas, and it tends to be the more kind of operational stuff that is left undefined. So at the moment, we're kind of, when we do our check-ins, we give an update on just general workload capacity on just a scale of 1 to 10, like where are you at the moment? Which then when we find at the end of the meeting, there's there's no allocation for certain things that need to be achieved. We then ask people to put up their hands to accept those different roles and take them on. I think that's working for the most part, but when someone doesn't put up their hand, I know that I'm kind of the worst of offender of saying, oh, I'll just do it, rather than maybe having a conversation around who is best placed to take on that, or looking back at that kind of capacity to take on more work at that particular point in time.
Maybe that bleeds a little into one of the topics of this week, right? Around, parent-child dynamics and maybe not adulting with each other. Just curious, like when you've got the tasks left on the table, are they normally sort of short-ish term things that somebody's just putting up their hand to do just because they're like a single move task or something that is relevant for the next period of time in between meetings, or are they longer term things?
It's a mix of both. Some of them are really longer term things, like coming up with a single source of truth for us as an operational team, working out kind of financial processes and how we'll work with different teams, etc. Those types of things. But then other things are, literally something that might take half a day.
Yeah, it's interesting to maybe just start even noticing the difference and how many of each are coming up in each session.
I think that could be really useful and some really great advice, actually.
And then, so you might decide that maybe there's enough of that kind of strategic longer term stuff that you need to really pull those out and have like a different, I guess a different strategy for deploying those roles, maybe. Horacio?
I'm not totally sure how to answer this because in my team, I mean, I'm in the research in a research team. My official title is applied research engineer. And since in research you say that you are not sure of what's going to happen, right? So my role is very coarsely defined. When we have periodic meetings in which we work mostly in the shorter term, depending on what has happened the last week, what is the most promising direction for the coming week, and rarely we have any longer view of what's going to happen. It's very blurry goals, let's say.
Do you have a sense that it'll stay like that forever, or are you feeling some tension or energy or directionality around like having a budget or having OKRs or?
Yeah, we have OKRs. There is a budget that has to be taken care of, but even the OKRs are also very, nebulous in the sense that we are working on this subject and we want to reach that that point in the future, but that future could be, hopefully it will be 1 month, but it could also be 2 years. So the Ethereum whole thing, there are things that were expected to arrive like 4 years ago, and are still now working on them. So
Yeah, super interesting. I don't know how to answer that. What are you thinking, Eileen?
I don't know how to answer Mauricio's question either. I'll keep pondering on that. But I guess one of the really interesting things about what Paul had mentioned was that a lot of the roles that were filled were based off, I guess, each person's strengths, right? Like their skill sets. And I, thinking about my positioning in within Infura, I know that there are some roles that I will just never be able to fill because I don't have that background. And so I think I was just wondering, like, if the roles are very fluid and you can move into another role, what is usually, I guess, like the timeline or the transition period between the roles?
Oh. Sorry, Achilles just joined in, so I was just putting her into a room. It all depends, right? So some roles, I think probably, I don't know, like this is just from my own experience. I think that 3 months is probably the shortest. And that would be a role that I think would be probably more tactical and more project focused. Most of the groups that I work with at least review roles on a 3-month basis, but each role is different, right? So, for example, if there's a role of, I don't know, meeting timekeeping and calendar scheduling admin, that's a role that probably nobody wants. So it might be better for that to rotate more quickly, right? So every 3 months. A role like banker probably is going to take some time to actually get into, create your own like process and flow. And so probably, you set it up in month 1, month 2, you run it. And then if it's going to change out at the end of month 3, then you're having to figure out your handover plan. So something like that might make sense for it to last longer. I think the good practice is to have a regular cadence of reviewing them. but having an intention when you set up that it's one thing. I mean, I hold some roles that are 18 to 24 month roles, and that's okay as well. Yeah, I think they're all different. But I mean, in your particular scenario, I think that's like, it sounds to me like a really good, healthy mix of like subject matter experts and like very focused, specific types of work. But then there probably would be 2 or 3 or 4 other hats that each of you could wear if that was, and that the other thing that I always encourage is for people to take a stretch goal, especially if you've got a little bit of capacity and you think, oh gosh, I don't know anything about I don't know anything about optimizing the UX, and that's something I'd really like to learn. Is that something that I could pair with somebody on? Because that's another option as well, right? So using it as not only focusing on strengths, ensuring all the work's done, but also as part of a development process as well. All right, I'm going to just let Kate know now that I'm going to bring everybody back so she doesn't. Okay. Please let me know if you can see this.
I can hear it.
Yeah. Right. Can you see that?
In the Zoom chat?
Yeah. Where did it come? Does it?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
It's on top.
yeah.
On top of the screen. Yeah.
Okay. Because I can't see it, which probably makes sense because I typed it. All right. I'm going to close the rooms now.
Okay. Susan?
Did you see that message? Great. Was it okay? All right. Sorry for being so quick before.
Okay, great. So we're going to jump into content now, and then our participatory exercise. So yeah, we're fully starting week 2 now. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Even though I just do, right. You can see all the weird documents I've got open. Share. So week 2, as you will have seen, is called building our, I'm not sharing, I'm presenting, building our capacity to collaborate. And this is very much zooming out to more of a theoretical level than week 1, which was very practical. And it was, week 1 was kind of at the team level. It was kind of like, how is self-organizing happening in our teams with some of those key kind of foundations around agreements, rhythm and cadence, roles, and at the individual level, the clue. So week 2 is like, it's at the theoretical layer, and it's also zooming back to the self and self-management. So this is what some of the things that you need to start thinking about at your own kind of individual growth level. So the objectives for this week are to understand the importance of communication in a self-organizing team, to experience how deep listening is a cornerstone of good communication culture and start to practice, and to start to think about how you can develop an adult-to-adult partnership culture in your team spoke and the mesh. We have that kind of organization onion where we look at the different layers. So as I mentioned, the tool this week, I won't tell you about what it is because we're going to practice it. And this is just a way that you can get away from everyone sitting in a room, one person talking at one time. So it's called a 1-2-4 all, and we'll do that shortly. A practice that we're also going to do is listening loops. The principle that underlies a lot of this focus on communication and listening culture is related to non-violent communication. Has anyone ever come across that? I'm just going to scroll across a few nods. Yep, raised hand from Thomas, Madeline, Eileen. And we have one slide to go into this, but it's its own kind of long, it's a training on its own, so we won't spend too much time on that. But it's kind of the notion is that listening and communicating is often, we're actually trying to express something deeper than just the words that we're saying. It's kind of like if you kind of lash out in a bit of frustration or anger at someone, it's actually often to do with a need that you have that hasn't been met, rather than necessarily what that other person is or is not doing. And if we can start to understand that most communication is kind of a way for us to get our needs met, it can actually change the way that we interact with other people. So that's a really important understanding. Okay, so the mindset that we're approaching listening, communication, and building our capacity to collaborate is this notion of like unconditional trust, or assuming the best. If we can like start to assume that I can trust you, you can trust me, that's our foundation. That's a really good mindset to begin this practice of self-organizing with. And then quite key and is this notion of this adult to adult mindset or partnership culture, where we start to move away from either being the child in a hierarchical relationship where, things that happened are actually not our fault, it's beyond our control, and therefore it's not our responsibility, to moving towards being equal and adult to adult and taking responsibility for changing things if they're not working, and not, having this parent that we can kind of rely on to get things done for us. So in a self-organizing culture, that doesn't exist. And so we really have to start to change how we are as well, because we often carry over a lot of that way of thinking from the old organizations that we've been in, or, from society in general. Do you want to add anything there, Susan?
Yeah, and I think it's like our normal ways of being as well. I mean, some of us have a default to being kind of more of the carer. Some of us have a default to being more comfortable just being told what to do. And I think that we, get into the middle and in these patterns of expectation that are normally based off of some experience we've had. All of us have had the experience of being in school, right? From the first day at school, sit down, be quiet, do what you're told, don't share, leave quietly. And sometimes it takes us a long time to break out of that, and you can't really tell when that switch is being flipped. I mean, in our home dynamics, even growing up in part of our family units, sometimes even when we're young, we take on, for one reason or another, more of a parenting or a caring perspective. And this is just another thing to pay attention to, but the impacts are far-reaching, especially in work dynamics, and especially where we're trying to create the conditions for more peer-level working and less hierarchy.
Cool. So we'll dig into that a little bit more in a minute. Horatio, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, can you go back to the previous slide?
Nope.
No.
There we go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. Just checking my understanding. Unconditional trust, to me, that sounds more like the relationship between child and parent than between adults, right? In a way. Can you comment on that, or I mean, am I getting it wrong?
So when you say it's like more, it seems to you to be more related to like a relationship between a parent and child. Is that because you can, no matter what happens, that they're still going to be your parent or your child? You can't get away from that. Whereas in a team, teams, and you can't necessarily always unconditionally trust someone.
Yeah. Maybe you could apply more something like what was it? Trust, but trust but check, or trust but confirm. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Sorry, there's some traffic. I mean, I think that's a good point. I think that when we say it's a mindset, it's not like you have to have an unconditional trust for all of your team members with each other all the time. It's just kind of like how you might approach being in a team, a self-organizing team, is that trust is the kind of the foundational mindset. You assume that you can trust others and be trusted. So maybe unconditional is maybe a bit strong. Do you want to add to that, Susan, just quickly, because we're going to keep going?
No, I like what Jenny said here, trust but verify. And for me, it's less about unconditional trust, but maybe just mutually expecting the best intentions, something like that.
Okay. Yeah, we can update that. I mean, it's maybe a semantics language thing. I kind of understand that as like taking on a mindset that you assume good intention, and maybe the unconditional trust is too strong. So we'll consider that further, Horatio. Thanks for raising it, and I'm going to keep moving. So a bit of a word that's used a lot is this notion of trust in self-organization, because that, as well as communication, is kind of like the essential mindsets for how we can move away from control and command and control. But there's details, or there's nuance to what we mean by trust. So there's an amazing reading in the reader about these 3 layers. So functional trust, we really covered quite a lot in week 1. That's, how we get stuff done together. But I want to, 1 and 3 are kind of areas that we also want to talk about, which is relational trust, how you can be expected to be treated and to treat others, and then flow of value trust, which is something that doesn't get talked about that often in most workplaces. So how we are mindful of difference, power, and reciprocity. So I'm not going to go too much into that now, because we've got a slide. We've got an exercise to just consider this a bit later on, because these are kind of complex ideas. So we'll give you a bit of time to talk about that, especially if you've done the reading. That will be helpful. Yep. So when we a big part of the reading and some of the resources that I think have been really helpful for people participating in SO101 and previous cohorts is this idea of transactional analysis, which is, did anyone watch the video that's included? Yeah, that's a really good video. I think if you do have time and you haven't managed to do that already, please take a look at that. And this is just that notion we talked about before, which is that, normal workplace culture and the way that the industrial kind of management paradigm has been organized is that you have a superior, or you are subordinate to someone who has more control and power and context than you. Therefore, that's, sometimes can be all right, because it's kind of like, well, it's not really my responsibility to change things. It's not actually, it's that person bears that weight along with many other things, and being a manager. Who here has been a manager or responsible for people below them before? Quite a few of you. Okay. Yep. So they're obviously, it's a complex thing, but in self-organizing teams, a main part of how we aim to work is to remove that layer. I mean, because often, and especially in digital technology companies, in my opinion, you don't need that layer of someone that holds the context and makes the decisions on behalf of other people, because the rate of change that we experience is so much more than old system organizations. Susan, do you want to say anything more on that? And maybe tell your little scenario?
So I've got several scenarios. I was sharing one with a group when we were talking about roles. More about I can remember times when I have been working in big hierarchical beasts of organizations like IBM or BP, where both I and the person that I was subordinate to would say things like, "Oh no, I'll just protect you from all of that stuff that's happening over here, up there, so that you can just get on with your work." And like even like have like saying those kind of things and feeling it is like, what am I? What is it really my role to protect? So that's one question. And then I guess the flip side to that is a scenario where if I am subordinate to somebody and I know that I can do anything I want, and because I've got a relationship where there's a parent dynamic going on, I don't really have to be responsible for anything because they'll take the blame, or they'll take the accountability. And I feel like this video is going to go far and wide. I feel like Joe does this a little bit, right? So I feel like Joe, if you listen to him on the town halls, I think he's getting better. But I think that because he does see himself as ultimately accountable, I think that sometimes he holds too much of that kind of good King Joe or good Dad Joe energy. And by not actually flowing down the accountability and responsibility to the people that are on maybe the circle leads or having more responsibility in the organization, he's maybe preventing them or allowing them to slip more into the posture of, well, Joe will look after me. And maybe that's too strong, and maybe you guys feel uncomfortable thinking about it that way, but I kind of see it that way a little bit sometimes.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add on that, just to be a pain, Susan, that sometimes, as with all of these, new states or new paradigms or new modalities that we're talking about, it's entirely appropriate to move into parent or child or adult. And the video really goes into that in quite a lot of detail. Not like, and maybe not so much, like the default, I think, at work should be adult to adult. But there are times, in life, especially where if there's like a real danger, like you need to parent someone, like you do it. And that's the same as when we talk about decentralized decision making. So sometimes it's most suitable to use a dictatorial or a delegated approach. We try to aim for collaborative, participatory, or emergent styles of decision making where possible, because that's the kind of direction that we're hoping to move in. But being in a self-organizing or a kind of a TL organization means that you can choose, and that you're not defaulting to one of these things all of the time. So you're not defaulting to child all the time because the system dictates it. The system and the structure of the organization mean that that's the only option available to you. You can, but if necessary, so you're trying to work in this adult to adult culture where you're being your most responsible self, you're taking responsibility for things that don't go well, and you are, striving to be your best and to not let people parent you or protect you or, even sometimes bully you, because you're actually operating at this adult to adult level. But as with all things, it's a choice. Okay, so we'll just keep moving because we want to get to the communication aspect, and the assignment for the week is basically you discussing transactional analysis in your teams. So you're going to be thinking more deeply about how some of these behaviors play out in your own lives and in your teams at work. So we will let you discuss that in your teams. So I'll go back to my little slides. We're running a little bit behind time, Susan. I think we'll be fine. And I really wish we could just discuss at length, but we can't. So I'll just leave it like this. Okay, so an important part of this is creating this zone of psychological safety. So if we're in the apathy zone, it probably means that, you know, apathy is like you're not invested, you're not caring, you're not voting. So that can actually happen when we have too much kind of top-down command and control. We also can get into the comfort zone where, as Susan mentioned, like someone's kind of comforting you, doing the emotional labor for you, protecting you. So you have high psychological safety, but low accountability. So an interesting area to try to get into is this learning zone where you actually have high psychological safety, which is done by a lot of time spent on communication and trust in a team, and also some of those foundational processes of making sure you're very clear on your rhythm and cadence, how you're going to be accountable for each other, how your understanding of how your colleagues work. So we're trying to like get into this learning zone here. The other zone, which is high accountability, which is like you're being held to a very high level of account for everything you do. The kind of like the, you know, a manager or someone who's going through your okay. Yeah. And your KPIs every week. So this is from my internet's unstable. A really great book called by Amy Edmondson, who's a quite a renowned coach and consultant on how teams kind of break through to new fields. So I just want to move on to listening and communication, and because it seems like, I feel like this is just sounds so self-evident whenever we talk about it, that listening and communication is like so foundational to the practice of self-management and self-organizing. But we kind of take it for granted that if you're hearing the words coming out of my mouth, that you're kind of, you can make sense of what's happening and you can kind of form your opinion based on that. But there's a lot of work that's been done kind of going much further into what listening really is. And this is a really helpful resource from Theory U from Otto Schweimer. So we listen, we download often when we're listening. We're just kind of hearing the words, and I do it all the time. And then I have to check myself and say, okay, am I doing all these layers? So factual listening is kind of something that I think many of us do pretty well as well. So like checking for inconsistencies, checking for the part where we're going to be like, oh no, I disagree with that. Here's my point. And then so getting down to those lower layers of actually empathetic listening, trying to empathize, even if you disagree, is a really crucial kind of part of listening. And then generative listening, which is kind of when you experience generative listening and really being held by someone who's a very experienced facilitator, it's like, it's pretty powerful place. And we can't really go into what that's like here and now, but I can only say it's, and maybe some of you have experienced it. And what we mean by that is like someone who's kind of like, you're in a room with, and you just notice their presence and the fact that they're not jumping to conclusions, that they're listening with this kind of questioning element and just holding, we call it holding space for what can act. And as I mentioned, this is based on the kind of theory of non-violent communication. So this is the understanding that communication is a very core part of what it means to be a human, and that it's more than just kind of this downloading notion of me taking information from you and then using it to get what I want. It's these 4 layers are kind of the 4 basic principles of nonviolent communication. And it's kind of the notion of, if you listen beneath what I'm expressing, there's probably a lot of detail that you're going to learn. So that takes us to our exercise that we're going to do now, which is building on some of these components and actually just trying to practice it, even if it feels very self-evident. And so it's an activity called listening loops. So we're going to put you into partners, which is, I'm assuming you can take care of. And you're going to please self-organize and I'll give you the link for the slides. Actually, Susan, can you drop that into the chat? So we want you to go through this process once each. So for 2 minutes, you'll tell your partner about a significant, and I'm going to make it a work experience that was either extremely positive or extremely challenging. You decide. So you've got 2 minutes, and we'll ask you to time yourselves, please. So the person that's not talking, please have a timer on.
Now,
so the person,
yeah. Now that I know how to do the broadcast, I'll broadcast at the end of 2 minutes so people know.
Okay, great. So the person that's listening, the person that's telling the story, I want you to silently think of a score from between 1 and 5, where 1 is kind of terrible listening and 5 is like, well, this person's really listening. But don't share it. And I know this sounds funny because we're on a screen, but I want you, when I say do your best possible listening, and that might be like, really engaged, nodding of the head. It could be even like, empathetic noises or a question around, can you say a little bit more about that? Or like even like that must have been so hard, or whatever it is. I just want you to offer up your like very best possible listening. And then you have to play back. So the listener plays back what they heard, words and feelings. And that doesn't necessarily have to be word for word. It's just kind of like, this is what I heard from you. However that you want to do that. And then after that, the speaker shares the score that you gave them based on how listened to you felt, and give them feedback on what was missing if it wasn't a 5. And most of the time we find that in these groups people give a 5. So really try to practice some radical candor and be like, right, it would have been a 5, but I did notice that your eyes were kind of sliding to the left of your screen on occasion, and maybe you were looking at something else, or kind of I just felt like at the key part of my story, I just really needed something from you to show that you'd heard it. I didn't get it. So we're just playing here. And then please switch the roles and repeat steps 1 to 4. And then we'll come back together and just do a little, Horatio, you have a question, which is perfect.
Does step 3 have an influence on step 4? I mean, because sounds like the score we have to give, it only depends on how we felt, not on what the listener repeats back to you. Is that so?
Great. No, I think this is, can I just offer you something here? This is a point of clarification is what you're doing, and it's very welcome. So you just say, I've got a clarifying question. And I would thank you for that, because it's not very clear that it is point 3, which is playing back words and feeling. It is about what you heard. So if you're just totally off and you're just talking about something they didn't say, no, that's not part of the exercise. So thank you for clarifying that, Horatio. You do need to play back words and how you felt. Is that clear?
No, but I'm not sure. I mean, no, what I wanted to, okay, imagine I say sorry?
Terrible listening from me. Please go ahead.
I'm talking about the whatever. I think it was a 4, let's say. Then I hear the person echo back the thing, and I realize that actually there was no listening. Should I change my score?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So if you gave them a 5 in the beginning, and then they played back, what they heard and felt, and actually they didn't get it, then you can change it to a 2. Good point. Thank you. Is everyone feeling clear on that? Okay, great. Okay,
so I'm going to put you into your rooms now, and just to make it easier, we'll just go alphabetical order from first name. Whoever is first in the alphabet shares first.
Great.
And I will broadcast a message at 2 minutes, which means that the person sharing stops. There's a slight pause, and then and then immediately the listener will feed back. And then at the end of that 2 minutes, I will post again, and then you have 1 minute to reflect back, and then you'll start over again. Does that make sense? Great. All right. Bye. Have fun.
and hearing about her experience was just it's nice to hear that all of the stuff that you go through yourself is kind of normal, and like stressing about things is a completely normal action as well. So yeah, I enjoyed it, just if nothing else for the personal connection.
Can anyone, reflect on how this form of listening, when you know that you're being scored and like you're really actively listening, is different to listening that you either do or receive in other parts of your life? I mean, it could be exhausting to do this all the time, but, like, is there any room for improvement as you think about how you interact in your daily workplace life?
I think particularly because we're remote, there's often a lot of, you're actually looking at other screens and stuff when you're meant to be listening, particularly because I'm a techno writer, I sit in a lot of development team meetings. So a lot of what they talk about is not directly relevant to me. So I tend to go off and get involved in other things. And then all of a sudden I realize they're talking to me and I'm not listening at all. And it's terrible.
Yeah. Calvin, good question. But people on various cohorts have tried this at home, like with their partner or their mother, and shared in the Friday session about what that was like. Just as more practice, I think it is a very interesting way just to start practicing and what it's like to really listen towards getting down to that layer of generative listening. And this relates a lot of the time, the root cause of conflict is to do with communication, as many of you will have experienced, either having misaligned understandings, not like communicating what you actually need, being misheard, having different interpretations of things. So our next little activity is to start to reflect a bit on how listening and communication impacts conflict, and how that, and we're just going to try, and this is a bit complex, but we're going to ask you to try to draw that back to the 3 levels of trust. So I'll share the slide, and please feel free to ask clarifying questions if this isn't clear to you. Hang on, I'm just mucking around with my computer. We'll get you to do this exercise, and then we'll come back and reflect. So this is the 1, 2, 4 all. This is one of Susan, sorry, there's a truck. Susan and I's favorite exercise to use with teams, because it just changes the way that we kind of operating with 1 for all is a great way for, the extroverted people to not necessarily be able to hold the floor, and for the introverted types of people to be able to reflect silently. So Horatio, this might work for you because you actually have a minute to reflect silently on your own thoughts before you share with others. So the activity goes for 1 minute, reflect silently on how you have seen conflict emerge in your team. And which of the 3 trust levels has it related to? So remember, in the reading and in the slides earlier, we talked about the 3 levels of trust. So think of the conflict that you've seen emerge, and is it related to like how we're treating each other? Like that there's just some deep interpersonal conflict between 2 of these polar opposite people, and they just can't hear each other, and they can't seem to, like, they just get at each other all the time? Or is it functional trust? Okay, person X is just never quite polishing off their work in a way that I like they get it half done and they kind of just leave it. Or is it flow of value trust? And that is like someone just has a bit more, privilege or experience or superiority, so-called, to someone else, and that kind of is coming out in a bit of a conflictual, a conflict in the team. So I just want you to reflect on the conflict, and just think about if it's a 1, 2, or 3. And then we're going to ask you after 1 minute we'll put you into groups of 2. So you'll just appear in a little box, and I just want you to share what came up for 2 minutes. So 1 minute each. And then we'll put you into groups of 5, actually, I think.
Yeah, 5 in configuration, yeah. So
and then the key part of being in the 4 of the 1, 2, 4 all is just to notice if there are any similarities and patterns. So we're trying to get to the level of observation rather than individual kind of, this happened to me, and we're trying to bring about any patterns or similarities. And then just nominate one person to share those patterns back to the group. Any questions? Okay. Cool. So we'll see you back in about 10 minutes.
Are we going to give people the minute here before we send them away, right?
Yeah, that's a good point, Susan. Thank you. We can all just look at each other as we silently reflect.
Okay, I'm sending you to your rooms now.
So I just had a thought that,
between me and Eileen, it was just me talking all the time, so it's more on me, really. But I think for us, the most popular topic of conversation was the second one, being functional trust. And there was a lot of talk around how we're all different, coming from different backgrounds, and how we all work. A lot of us are still new in consensus, which I think is the thing. So a lot of us are going through that. How do I work in this new environment? It's video all the time, different regions, different countries. And then we sort of stop there.
Okay, so a lot's happening at that functional trust level, but it's impacted by other things at those other layers. Okay, cool. And we have a request from Frank to turn mics off when not speaking. Thank you, Frank. The other group, who's presenting back?
What we noticed was there is a cascading effect. So whether it starts with 1, 2, or 3, if that isn't resolved, we've seen that the other 2 tend to like cascade and follow. And we each had examples of how that happened, whether it started with a power dynamic or functional, or how people treat each other, but then it cascaded into dealing with the other 2 very quickly.
Yeah, nice harvesting of patterns in the conversation there. Thank you. Thomas, can I ask you to share now around what your team, how you've kind of hacked together a bit of a process for conflict resolution? We will just have time to hear from you, and then we're going to move into our teams. So I had a chat to Thomas the other day in office hour a little bit about this, and I thought it would be interesting to share. Academy's kind of put together a bit of a process for when conflict emerges.
So to give context, Academy, we moved from a very hierarchical form of governance to trying to distribute more and more of that. We have a 3 co-lead team model, which is kind of, I think is unique within consensus. But a product of that is when conflict arises, it can be confusing how conflict is resolved, whether it's between co-leads, team members, a team member, and a co-lead. So we created a sort of a self-organizing process of if or as conflict emerged, groups within our team would bubble that up and form a group to sort of surface the issue, and then we would bring it into our team meeting, as well as bring it into a co-lead check-in. And the way that we've gone about creating this feedback, this like quarterly feedback model that we're moving to, is like to have those, like the co-leads have both implicit and explicit power, is basically acknowledge the power, demonstrate vulnerability by saying we want like one-on-one feedback with whomever you'd want to give it to with any group, and then also create, if you're not comfortable, an anonymous way to give feedback as well. And what we're starting to see is that like emergent processes of team members just setting up one-on-one check-ins with each other. I think part of that is also certain team members had gone through SO101. And then we're bringing that into our team meetings, and hopefully in the future, like whether remote or virtual offsites, to continue to explore that.
I'd love to hear, Thomas, maybe just in a few sentences, how that's felt for you.
For me, I think the word would be like stepping into leadership. For me personally, I am one of those co-leads, and probably most likely to be like, let's decentralize the co-lead model. But there has been an ask from team members, like, you're in this position, and like acknowledge the power dynamic and then play a useful role, right? Like that's important. That's what you're wanted to do. And I think that's been probably the most difficult part of it for me personally.
Thank you. And I just thought that was a really valuable process that the team has started to co-create that together. And that relates to what we shared on in the rhythm and cadence breakout room, that, you know, start to think about your own context and what's going to serve you. And like some teams will have, you know, some hierarchical structures still in place, even if they're trying to move towards more flat and self-organizing, and to just be aware of that and to start thinking about how, if conflict emerges in your team, what currently happens and what a peer-to-peer conflict resolution process will look like. And we will be going into that in a bit more detail as well, and we'll share some resources around that, because we do realize that we've also packed, Susan gave me the feedback in the breakout session, that there's probably quite a few concepts, maybe too many in this week, because I've changed it a little bit. And we're going to invite you to do a written retrospective in the Slack, and I'm going to model just you all know how to do it, like a liked, disliked, longed for, and I'll start that off. But now we're going to break into our teams for the week, for you to just see if you can find time to schedule a meeting and to discuss how you're going to work together. And we'll come back for a very, very speedy checkout at 4 minutes to Susan.
Yep, great. And again, apologies for having to change the teams around, but it just had to happen just because of the variable participation. So I'm going to put you into your team rooms now, and I've also just refreshed the team link in the Slack. So see you all at 4 minutes to the hour.
Okay, the checkout question is, how would your closest friend describe you in one word or two? Susan, you start.
Just for those that are coming back, the checkout question is, how would your closest friend describe you in one word? And the PC version of mine is curious.
You can tell me later what the PC version is. I'm just going to call you in because we've got limited time. Karima.
Probably ambitious, what she would say.
Cool. Good to know. Okay, Calvin.
Boringly funny.
What was the first word?
Boringly funny.
Boringly funny. Wow. Brianna.
Probably sparkly.
Sparkly. Nice. Thomas.
I would hope loyal.
Loyal. Okay. Yeah, these are all projections, but loyal. Jenny.
I think I would get chill.
Chill. Okay. Madeline.
Books a lot.
Eileen.
Spontaneous.
Spontaneous. Woo. Horatio.
I'm thinking unpredictable.
Unpredictable, spontaneous. Whoa, we've got some live ones. Frank.
Goal oriented.
And then, good. Some more goal oriented. Very nice. Sean.
Too detailed.
Too detailed. Is that everyone apart from me? Yeah. I think they would say F word crazy. Okay. And we finished 2 minutes early. We're amazing. Great. We'll see you on Friday. And I'm going to model the retro that I'd love for you to just take 2 minutes to do so we can sense into how this journey is going for you, which I'm going to put into the Slack right now. So just a liked change longed for.
Mm-hmm. And Kate, are you having office hours this week?
Yes, I'm having office hours at the same time on Thursday. And maybe we'll just do it like if you plan to come, just ping me in the chat. And if there's like 20 people, we'll organize somehow. But it was really good last week with Jenny and Thomas. So please feel free to drop in. And Susan, you had a message about thanking people in the US.
Oh yeah, just thanks any of you that are in the US for taking time on your holiday to join us. It means a lot, and I just wanted to recognize that. So thanks.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. See you on Friday. Looking forward.
Bye. Thanks. Oh, do we have a sign?
No, but we'll do it next week.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.